Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another virtual breakfast. My name is Eric Anderson. I'm a field crops educator down on the Indiana border, and I'll be your host this morning. Starting off, we're going to have Manni Singh talking about corn and soybean planting, some of the historical patterns, then also what he's seeing so far this year. We'll move on to our weather outlook from Jeff Andreessen. And special for today, we're going to actually have a third presentation. We'll leave it to the end, but Dennis Pennington has prepared a short video for us on how to assess winter wheat stands. And then Dennis will also be live joining us, so if anyone has any questions about that, we'll be able to ask him as well. So, Manni, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning, and let's get started here. I'm going to start with where we are, and I know Jeff is going to cover more about this later on, but I'll just give a couple of quick pointers here. So I think, as all of you know, we have been relatively cool here. You can see the 2019 growing degree day map here. Little bit more ahead in the south compared to in the north. And we are a little bit ahead of where we were last year, as shown in the graph on the right. But overall, compared to a long-term average, we are still behind. So we are relatively cool at this point. And as all of you know, we have been really wet. This graph shows the precipitation in the last 14 days, and it goes anywhere between 2 to 4 or even 5 inches. So this is a result of all of this. It's a lot of our fields are looking like this, a lot of wet spots out there, right? So this cool and wet start of the spring in combination with some of the missed fall field operations we had due to the lot of rain we received back in last fall caused a little bit delay in the progress of the growing season, as shown with all these red colors on these two images. Basically, the area planted in 2019 up till last week in corn, we are at 2%, which is about 3% behind compared to our 5-year average. And in soybean, we are right on the ballpark. But with all the rain that we are receiving this week, I expect us to get a lot behind. So again, this late and little bit slow start will result in basically growers need to reassess and adjust their management practices in a way essentially that can still expedite crop establishment, which is really critical, especially when we are dealing with a little bit delayed planting scenario. But I would like to point out that that does not mean that we want to go in and plant into marginal soil conditions, because that can actually harm our yield potential more than it can benefit it. Basically, and what does that mean? Essentially, in terms of soil temperatures, as you can see in this figure here from until last week, we are doing okay. Most of the state is above that 50-degree threshold that gets thrown around for basically imbibition, chilling, injury not to occur. So we are okay there, but my worry is basically this slow emergence and initial growth in our crops due to this cool temperature conditions because the growing degree day accumulation is really low, and both corn and soybean need around 90 to 120 growing degree days. And right now our high temperatures are hovering around 60 degrees, so we are accumulating maybe 5 growing degree days on a given day. So at that pace, it'll take 15 to 20 days for the crops to emerge, and makes it more prone to all kind of insects and diseases, mostly seedling diseases out there, right? So the second factor here is soil moisture, which is more relevant where we are right now with all this rain. And we want to make sure that we are not basically cultivating our fields and planting when the soil is wet. This is what we generally call mudding the seed in. We want to avoid that because it can lead to poor seed to soil contact. It can also lead to soil crusting and the smearing of the sidewall, which can result in sidewall compaction and really restrict our root growth later in the growing season, and eventually lead to again a loss in yield potential. So we really want to avoid basically mudding the seed in basically right when we start getting a little bit dry here, and when folks are going to feel a rush to start planting as soon as they can. So again, planting into good soil conditions is important. Uh, Otherwise, it can result in yield limitations, loss. One way to do that is basically limit our field operations so we can expedite plantings. For example, limit our tillage operations, or even start up fertilizer applications in a crop like soybean. In terms of basically, again, now thinking about what we need to be doing in terms of where we are from management perspective. Our planting window is relatively short because we are so far north here in Michigan anyways. But still, the point I want to make is that basically we need to make sure we are planting in good conditions, because the data has shown that even mid to end of May planting can still provide us in high yield. Last year was a good example for soybeans that even though we were behind, we were able to get pretty decent yields. And planting too early can result in a loss of yield. As you can see on this figure on the right, this is our 2017 data, where we tried to plant really early, and we had a really pounding rain after that April 27th, and we basically ended up losing yield. So this yield loss was not because of early planting, but because of planting into poor soil conditions. So we want to avoid that. And again, there is still plenty of time. And once hopefully we get a break in weather, a lot of planting can be done within a given week, as we have seen in a couple of years before. In terms of what to plant first, corn and soybean, I would like to rephrase this question and say that it depends on the equipment availability and field conditions. So dependent on the crop rotation, if a field has a light texture soil and let's say has a drainage, that field will dry up quickly. So we want to make sure we are going into that field and planting whatever crop that that field is supposed to receive. So again, basically optimal planting conditions is important. And again, not rushing with this current weather into planting, I guess, is going to be important as well. Another important factor that will come into play is maturity selection. Most of us do have these adapted varieties and hybrid that we are planning to plant, but what happens basically if we are dealing with a little bit delayed planting scenario? Do we need to switch our maturities? And based on the current research, most of the time if we are planting in May, we can keep that same maturity, both in corn and soybean. But then if we're dealing with late plantings, then we need to start thinking about that. Do we need to switch into an early maturity variety in terms of keeping a high yield potential and dealing with some of these other risks that might occur? So starting with soybean, here is some of our data from 2018. I'm presenting just one location, but both of our locations gave a similar results. Here you can see we had 4 planting times, starting with early from end of April, going all the way into end of June with very late planting. And using up to 6 maturity groups ranging from 1 to 3.5 within each planting date. And we did see this staircase increase in yield with the early planting, essentially showing that the benefit of early planting is mostly occurring when we are using a longer maturity group. But again, in this current weather, if we are dealing with some of these later planting scenarios, we can see that as we went into this late June, we actually did benefit from using a relatively early maturity variety here, basically. So keep that in mind. In terms of corn, I have been looking at a lot of our data from the Michigan corn performance trials, and I'm really not seeing a good correlation between using a longer maturity and increase in grain yield, while we always see an increase in moisture content with the longer maturity. So that results into basically not much difference in net returns, or actually even a decline in net returns with the use of longer maturity. So again, with delayed planting, I would recommend not basically staying with the too long of a maturity. Again, we want to have essentially a portfolio approach where we have combination of maturity, so the harvesting window can be spread out. But basically using mid to early maturity hybrids helps us in terms of grain drying in field and minimizing some of these mycotoxin issues that we have seen recently. We have some data that shows that a use of longer maturity group might basically increase the risk of having some of those mycotoxins. So just another important point to keep in mind. Moving on, in terms of seeding rates, starting with soybean here, again, the similar study that I was explaining before, we have 4 planting dates here going from end of April to end of June. And we tried actually to go as low as 50,000 and as high as 210,000, 100,000 seeds. And as you can see, we did not really see a benefit of increase in seeding rate or going anywhere above 90,000 in our first 3 plantings, basically going from end of April into early June. We did see an increase in yield only with this really delayed planting. So basically it made sense to increase seeding rate in soybean when we were dealing with this really late plantings into mid-June essentially. Otherwise we could cut our seed down to basically and to decrease our input cost and improve our profit margin. And this all comes down to this figure here that as we go down on our seeding rates, basically the plant is able to branch out more and essentially compensate for that low stand essentially. So again, I think a lot of agronomists at other universities have used this 100,000 plants as a final stand number. Which I think is a good number to target, but some of this current research is showing that we can even go a little bit lower than that. And based on, again, the planting conditions, we need to adjust our planting rate to get close to this 100,000 number. In terms of corn, the ideal rate varies between 28 to 34,000 seeds per acre based on the yield potential in that field. And again, if we are planting early, basically the germination loss could be that typical 5 to 10%. But as the planting gets delayed, I think we expect the germination to improve because those soils are not cold and wet anymore. So the actual seeding rate can be reduced with the delay in planting in case of corn. Again, factoring in those warm soils later in the growing season. Seed quality is an important component here this year, especially in soybean. There were some concerns with the quality with that delayed fall harvesting and some of the fungal diseases that we were seeing. So keeping that quality in mind and planting the high quality seed first is going to be important. And if that germination percent on that seed tag is 85% or low, we might want to go for a cold germ test to make sure that we understand the quality of that seed. And the last point I want to make here is about seed treatment. Again, generally we see the most benefit from a seed treatment with the early plantings when the soil is cold and wet. So, but in our research, we have seen that the seed treatment was able to improve the plant stand, but not essentially yield increase. So again, dependent on field history and planting conditions, seed treatment could be a benefit, especially in a season like this. So essentially, to wrap it up, again, we want to make sure that we do expedite our crop establishment if we do get delayed in planting. But planting into marginal soil conditions is not the way to go. Limiting field operations might benefit to achieve that. And again, in terms of prioritizing corn and soybean, planting as per field conditions is the ideal way. Switching maturity if we get really delayed is beneficial. And then in terms of seeding rate, targeting that optimal final stand is important. All right, that's all I had to say today. A quick reminder on the Ag Innovation Day on July 26th. And with that, I would like to take any questions, and thanks you for attending.
All right, thanks, Manny. I have one question in the chat right now, but if anyone else has a question, please feel free to use the chat function. So Manny, the question I have right now is, does planting rate change based on row width over time?
That's a good question, actually. There is, at least in corn, there was some research showing that with the narrow rows, the planting rate could be pushed a little bit higher, but a lot of recent research doesn't really, I think, agree with that. So in corn, I think at least with the change in row spacing, I don't expect seeding rate to vary a whole lot. And with the delay in planting, again, I think one of the important point to keep in mind is we want to close that canopy as we are getting delayed as quickly as possible to maximize light interception, right? So there might be some benefit there, basically, if we are in 30 inches compared to 15 inches, because 15 would close canopy sooner. In terms of soybean, again, I think a similar argument holds, that basically 15 inches close the canopy quickly compared to 30 inches. So there might be a little bit more benefit of increasing seeding rate more in 30 inches compared to 15 inches. And all of our research is actually in 15. So we don't have data to actually justify that.
All right. Thank you, Manny.